By the authority of the Immaculate Heart. Georg Hegel, Philosophy of Mind, Section 1, Subjective Mind, Subsection C, Psychology, Mind, der Geist, supra-subsection A, Theoretical Mind, Theo is God, and retinical is lens, so theoretical is the lens of God. Metasection Beta, representation or mental idea, Vorstellung. Quantum section Beta Beta, imagination, die Einbildungskraft. Encyclopedia section 458. In this unity, initiated by intelligence, of an independent representation with an intuition, the matter of the latter is, in the first instance, something accepted, somewhat immediate or given, ergo, the color of the cockade, etc. But in the fusion of the two elements, the intuition does not count positively or as representing itself, but as representative of something else. It is an image which has received as its soul and meaning an independent mental representation. This intuition is the sign. The sign is some immediate intuition, representing a totally different import from what naturally belongs to it. It is the pyramid into which a foreign soul has been conveyed, and where it is conserved. The sign is different from the symbol, for in the symbol the original characters, in essence and conception, of the visible object are more or less identical with the import which it bears as symbol, whereas in the sign, strictly so called, the natural attributes of the intuition and the connotation of which it is a sign have nothing to do with each other. Intelligence, therefore, gives proof of wider choice and ampler authority in the use of intuition. In the use of intuitions, when it treats them as designatory, significative, rather than as symbolical. In logic and psychology, signs and in logic and psychology, signs and language are usually foisted in somewhere as an appendix, without any trouble being taken to display their necessity and systematic place in the economy of intelligence. The right place for the sign is that just given, where intelligence, which as intuiting generates form of time and space, but is apparently recipient of sensible matter, out of which it forms ideas, now gives its own original ideas a definite existence from itself, treating the intuition, or time and space as filled full, as its own property, deleting the connotation which properly and naturally belongs to it, and conferring on it an other connotation as its soul and import. This sign creating activity may be distinctively named productive memory, the primarily abstract mnemo sign. Since memory, which in ordinary life is often used as interchangeable and synonymous with remembrance, recollection, and even when conception and imagination has always to do with the signs only. If you're familiar with Liber 418, Air, I believe 28, you will know what Nemo is. Encyclopedia section 459, the intuition, in its natural phase, a something given and given in space, acquires when employed as a sign the particular characteristic of existing only as superseded and sublimated. Such is the negativity of intelligence, and thus the truer phase of the intuition used as a sign is existence in time, but its existence vanishes in the moment of being. And if we consider the rest of its external physical quality, its intuition by intelligence, but an institution growing out of its anthropological own naturalness. This institution of the natural is the vocal note, where the inward idea manifests itself in adequate utterance. The vocal note, which receives further articulation to express specific ideas, speech, and its system, language, gives to sensations, intuitions, conceptions, a second and higher existence than they naturally possess. Invest them with the right of existence in the ideational realm. Language here comes under discussion only in the special aspect of a product of intelligence for manifesting its ideas in an external medium. If language had to be treated in its concrete nature, it would be necessary for its vocabulary or material part to recall the anthropological or psychophysiological points of view. See section 401. And for the grammar or formal portion to anticipate the standpoint of analytic misunderstanding with regard to the elementary material of language, while on the one hand the theory of mere accident has disappeared, on the other the principle of imitation has been restricted to the slight range it actually covers, that of vocal objects. Yet one may still hear the German language praised for its wealth, that wealth consisting in its special expression for special sounds. Ocean, Soschen, Naden, and such. There have been collected more than 100 such words, perhaps. The humor of the moment creates fresh ones when it pleases. Such superabundance in the realm of sense and of triviality contributes nothing to the form the real wealth of a cultivated language. Such superabundance in the realm of sense and of triviality contributes nothing to form the real wealth of a cultivated language. The strictly raw material of language itself depends more upon an inward symbolism than a symbolism referring to external objects. It depends, in essence, on anthropological articulation, as it were the posture in the corporal act of oral utterance. For each vowel and consonant, accordingly, as well as for their more abstract elements, the postures of lips, palate, tongue in each. And for their combinations, people have tried to find the appropriate signification. But these dull, subconscious beginnings are deprived of their original importance and prominence by new influences. It may be by external agencies or by the needs of civilization. Having been originally sensuous intuition. Having been originally sensuous intuitions, they are reduced to signs, and thus have only traces left of their original meanings, if it be not altogether extinguished. As to the formal element, again, it is the work of analytic intellect which informs language with its categories. It is this logical instinct which gives rise to grammar. The study of languages, still in their original state, which we have first really begun to make acquaintance with in modern times, has shown on this point that they contain a very elaborate grammar and express distinctions which are lost or have been largely obliterated in the languages of more civilized nations. It seems as if the language of the most civilized nations has the most imperfect grammar, and that the same language has a more perfect grammar when the nation is in a more uncivilized state than when it reaches a higher civilization. See for reference W. von Humboldt's essay on the duel. In speaking of vocal, which is the original language, we may touch, only in passing upon written language, a further development in the particular sphere of language which borrows the help of an externally practical activity. It is from the province of immediate spatial intuition to which written language proceeds that it takes and produces the signs. See section 454. In particular, hieroglyphics uses spatial features. In particular, hieroglyphics uses spatial figures to designate ideas. Alphabetical writing, on the other hand, uses them to designate vocal notes, which are already signs. Alphabetical writing thus consists of signs of signs. The words are concrete signs of vocal language being analyzed into their simple elements, which severally receive their designation. Leibniz Leibniz's practical mind misled him to exaggerate the advantages which a complete written language formed on the hieroglyphic method, and hieroglyphics are used even where there is alphabetic writing, as in our signs for the numbers, the planets, the chemical elements, and similar. Would have as a universal language for the intercourse of nations, and especially of scholars, but we may be sure that it was rather the intercourse of nations, as was probably the case in Phoenicia, and still takes place in Canton. See MacArtney's Travels by Staunton, which occasioned the need of alphabetical writing and led to its formation. At any rate, a comprehensive hieroglyphic language forever compl- at any rate, a comprehensive hieroglyphic language forever completed is impracticable. Sensible objects no doubt admit of permanent signs, but as regards signs for mental objects, the progress of thought and the continual development of logic lead to changes in the views of their internal relations, and thus also of their nature. And this would involve the rise of a new hieroglyphical denotation. Even in the case of sense objects, it happens that their names, in essence, their signs in vocal language, are frequently changed, as ergo in chemistry and mineralogy or mineralogy. Now that it has been forgotten what names properly are, these are as seen through externalities which of themselves have no sense and only get signification as signs, and now that, instead of names proper, people ask for terms expressing a sort of definition, which is frequently changed capriciously and fortuitously, the denomination, i.e., in essence, the composite name formed of signs of their generic characters or other supposed characteristic properties, is altered in accordance with the differences of view with regard to the genus or other supposed specific property. It is only a stationary civilization, like the Chinese, which admits of the hieroglyphic language of that nation, and its method of writing, moreover, can only be the lot of that small part of a nation which is in exclusive possession of mental culture. The progress of the vocal language depends most closely on the habit of alphabetical writing, by means of which only does vocal language acquire the precision and purity of its articulation. The imperfection of the Chinese vocal language is notorious. Numbers of its words possess several utterly different meanings, as many as 10 and 20, so that in speaking, the distinction is made perceptible merely by accent and intensity, by speaking low and soft, or crying out. The European, learning to speak Chinese, falls into the most ridiculous blunders before he has mastered these absurd refinements of accentuation. Perfection here consists in the opposite of that parler sans accent, which in Europe is justly required of an educated speaker. The hieroglyphic mode of writing keeps the Chinese vocal language from reaching that objective precision which is gained in articulation by alphabetic writing. Alphabetic writing is on all accounts the more intelligent. In the word, the mode, peculiar to the intellect of uttering its ideas most worthily, is brought to consciousness and made an object of reflection, engaging the attention of intelligence. As it does, it is analyzed. The work of sign making is reduced to its few simple elements, the primary postures of articulation, in which the sense factor in speech is brought to the form of universality, at the same time that in this elementary phase it acquires complete precision and purity. Thus, alphabetic writing retains at the same time the advantage of vocal language, that the ideas have names strictly so called. The name is the simple sign from the exact idea, i.e., in essence, the simple, plain idea, not decomposed into its features and compounded out of them. Hieroglyphics, instead of springing from the direct analysis of sensible signs, like alphabetic writing, arise from an antecedent analysis of ideas. Thus, a theory readily arises that all ideas may be reduced to their elements, or simply logical terms, so that from the elementary signs chosen to express these, as in the case of the Chinese guo, the simple straight stroke, and the stroke broken into two parts, a hieroglyphic system would be generated by their composition. This feature of hieroglyphic, the analytical, this feature of hieroglyphic, the analytical designation of ideas, which misled Leibniz to regard it as preferable to alphabetic writing, is rather in antagonism with the fundamental desideratum of language, the name. To want a name means that for the immediate idea, which, however ample a connotation it may include, is still for the mind simple in the name, we require a simple immediate sign which, for its own sake, does not suggest anything, and has for its sole function to signify and represent sensibly the simple idea as such. It is not merely the image loving and image limited intelligence that lingers over the simplicity of ideas and integrates them from the more abstract factors into which they have been analyzed. Thought too reduces to the form of a simple thought the concrete connotation which it resumes and reunites from the mere aggregate of attributes to which analysis has reduced it. Both alike require such signs, simple in respect of their meanings, simple in respect of their meaning, signs which, through consisting, both alike require such signs, simple in respect of their meaning, signs which, though consisting of several letters or syllables and even decomposed into such, yet do not exhibit a combination of several ideas. What has been stated is the principle for settling the value of these written languages. It also follows that, in hieroglyphics, the relations of concrete mental ideas to one another must necessarily be tangled and perplexed, and that the analysis of these and the proximate results of such analysis must again be analyzed appears to be possible in the most various and divergent ways. Every divergence in analysis would give rise to another formation of the written name, just as in modern times, as already noted, even in the region of sense, muriatic acid has undergone several changes of name. A hieroglyphic written language would require a philosophy as stationary as is the civilization of the Chinese. What has been said shows the inestimable and not sufficiently appreciated educational value of learning to read and write an alphabetic character. It leads the mind from the sensibly concrete image to attend to the more formal structure of the vocal word and its abstract elements, and contributes much to give stability and independence to the inward realm of mental life. Acquired habit subsequently effaces the peculiarity by which alphabetic writing appears, in the interest of vision, as a roundabout way to ideas by means of audibility. It makes them a sort of hieroglyphic to us, so that in using them we need not consciously realize them by means of tones, whereas people unpracticed in reading utter aloud what they read in order to catch its meaning in the sound. Thus, while with the faculty which transformed alphabetic writing into hieroglyphics, the capacity of abstraction gained by the first practice remains, hieroglyphic reading is of itself a deaf reading and a dumb writing. It is true that the audible, which is in time, and the visible, which is in space, each have their own basis, one no less authoritative than the other. But in the case of alphabetic writing, there is only a single basis. The two aspects occupy their rightful relation to each other. The visible language is related to the vocal only as a sign, and intelligence expresses itself immediately and unconditionally by speaking. The instrumental function of the comparatively non-sensuous elements of tone for all ideational work shows itself further as peculiarly important in memory, which forms the passage from representation to thought. Encyclopedia section 460, the name, combining the intuition and intellectual production with its signification, is primarily a single transient product and conjunction of the idea which is inward with the intuition which is outward, is itself outward. The reduction of this outwardness to inwardness is verbal memory. Section 1, Subjective Mind. Subsection C, Psychology. Mind, der Geist. Supra subsection A, Theoretical Mind. Metasection Beta, Representation or Mental Idea. Vorstellung. Quantum section Gamma Gamma, Memory. Gedächtnis. Under the shape of Encyclopedia section 461. Under the shape of memory, the course of intelligence passes through the same inwardizing recollecting functions as regards the intuition of the word, as representation in general does in dealing with the first immediate intuition. See section 451. Infra section 1. Making its own, the synthesis achieved in the sign, intelligence by this inwardizing, memorizing, elevates the single synthesis to a universal, i.e., in essence, permanent synthesis in which name and meaning are for its objectively united, making its own synthesis, achieved in the sign, intelligence by this inwardizing, memorizing, elevates the single synthesis to a universal, in essence permanent, synthesis, in which name and meaning are for it objectively united, and renders the intuition, which the name originally is, a reputation. Thus, the import, connotation, and sign being identified form one representation. The representation in its inwardness is rendered concrete and gets existence from its import, all this being the work of memory which retains name, retentive memory. Encyclopedia section 462. The name is thus the thing so far as it exists and counts in the ideational realm. Infra section 2. In the name, reproductive memory has and recognizes the thing, and with the thing it has the name, apart from intuition and image. The name as giving and existence to the content and intelligence is the externality of intelligence to itself, and the inwardizing or recollection of the name, in essence, of an intuition of intellectual origin, is at the same time a self externalization to which intelligence reduces itself on its own ground. The association of the particular names lies in the meaning of the features, sensitive, representative, or cogitant, series of which the intelligence traverses as it feels, represents, or thinks. The association of the particular names lies in the meaning of the features, sensitive, representative, or cogitant, series of which the intelligence traverses as it feels, represents, or thinks. Given the name lion, We need neither the actual vision of the animal nor its image, even. The name alone, if we understand it, is the unimaged simple representation. We think in names. The recent attempts, already as they deserved, forgotten, to rehabilitate the mnemonic of the ancients consist in transforming names into images, and thus again deposing memory to the level of imagination. The place of the power of memory is taken by a permanent tableau of a series of images fixed in the imagination, to which is then attached the series of ideas forming the composition to be learned by rote. Considering the heterogeneity between the import of these ideas and those permanent images, and the speed with which the attachment has to be made, the attachment cannot be made otherwise than by shallow, silly, and utterly accidental links. Not merely is the mind put to the torture of being worried by idiotic stuff, but what is thus learnt by rote is just as quickly forgotten, seeing that the same tableau is used for getting by rote every other series of ideas, and so those previously attached to it are effaced. What is mnemonically impressed is not like what is retained in memory, really got by heart, in essence, strictly produced from within outwards, from the deep pit of the ego, and thus recited, but is, so to speak, read off the tableau of fancy. Mnemonic is connected with the common prepossession about memory in comparison with fancy and imagination, as if the latter were a higher and more intellectually, as if the latter mnemonic is connected with the common prepossession about memory, in comparison with fancy and imagination, as if the latter were a higher and more intellectual activity than memory. On the contrary, memory has ceased to deal with an image derived from intuition, the immediate and incomplete mode of intelligence. It has rather to do with an object which is the product of intelligence itself, such a without book, auswendigs, as remains locked up in the within book, inwendigs, of intelligence, and is within intelligence only its outward and existing side. Encyclopedia section 463, infrasection 3. As the interconnection of the names lies in the meaning, the conjunction of their meaning with the reality as names is still an external synthesis, and intelligence in this its externality has not made a complete and simple return into itself. But intelligence is the universal, the single plain truth of its particular self divestments, and its consummated appropriation of them abolishes that distinction between meaning and name. This extreme inwardizing of representation is the supreme divestment of intelligence, in which it renders itself the mere being, the universal space of names as such, in essence of meaningless words. The ego, the ego, the ego, which is this abstract being, is because subjectivity at the same time the power over the different names, the link which, having nothing in itself, fixes in itself series of them and keeps them in stable order, so far as they merely are. And intelligence is here itself this being of theirs. Its power is a merely abstract subjectivity. Memory, which, on account of the complete externality in which the members of such series stand to one another, and because it is itself this externality, subjective though that be, is called mechanical. See section 195. A composition is, as we know, not thoroughly coned by root. until one attaches no meaning to the words. The recitation of what has thus got by heart is therefore, of course, accentless. The correct accent, if it is introduced, suggests the meaning. But this introduction of the signification of an idea disturbs the mechanical nexus and therefore easily throws out the reciter. The faculty of conning by rote series of words with no principle governing their succession, or which are separately meaningless, e.g., ergo, therefore, a series of proper names, is so supremely marvelous, because it is the very essence of mind, to have its wits about it. Whereas in this case, the mind is estranged in itself, and its action is like machinery. But it is only as uniting subjectivity with objectivity that the mind has its wits about it. But it is only as uniting subjectivity with objectivity that the mind has its wits about it. Whereas in the case before us, after it has an intuition, been at first so external as to pick up its facts ready made, and in representation inwardizes or recollects this datum and makes it its own, it proceeds as memory to make itself external in itself, so that what is its own assumes the guise of something found. Thus, one of the two dynamic factors of thought, viz., or by imaging, thus one of the two dynamic factors of thought, in a sense objectivity, is here put in intelligence itself as a quality of it. It is only a step further to treat memory as mechanical, the act implying no intelligence, in which case it is only justified by its uses. Its indispensability, perhaps, for other purposes and functions of mind. But by so doing, we overlook the proper signification it has in the mind. Encyclopedia section 464. If it is to be the fact in true objectivity, the mere name as an existent requires something else, to be interpreted by the representing intellect. Now, in the shape of mechanical memory, intelligence is at once the external objectivity and the meaning. In this way, intelligence is explicitly made an existence of this identity. In essence, it is explicitly active as such an identity, which as reason it is implicitly. Memory is in this manner the passage into the function of thought, which no longer has a meaning. Memory is in this manner the passage into the function of thought, which no longer has a meaning. In essence, its objectivity is no longer severed from the subjective, and its inwardness does not need to go outside for its existence. The German language has etymologically assigned memory, Gedächtnis, of which it has become a foregone conclusion to speak contemptuously, the high position of direct kindred with thought, Gedanke. It is not matter of chance that the young have a better memory than the old, nor is their memory solely exercised for the sake of utility. The young have a good memory because they have not yet reached the stage of reflection. Their memory is exercised with or without design, so as to level the ground of their inner life to pure being or to pure space, in which the fact, the implicit content, may reign and unfold itself with no antithesis to a subjective inwardness. Genuine ability is in youth, generally combined with a good memory. But empirical statements of this sort help little towards a knowledge of what memory intrinsically is. To comprehend the position of meaning of memory and to understand its organic interconnection with thought is one of the hardest points, and hitherto one quite unregarded in the theory of mind. Memory qua memory. Memory being memory, memory as a sign, not a symbol of memory, is itself the merely external mode or merely existential aspect of thought, and thus needs a complementary element. The passage from it to thought is, to our view, and implicitly, the identity of reason with this existential mode, an identity from which it follows that reason only exists in a subject and as the function of that subject. Thus, active reason is thinking. And thinking involves hearing. And since letters and words, and in some languages, the amount of letters in a word and how they're arranged on the page become symbols for many, many other things, it is sometimes helpful to hear what has been written and in that hearing have that which is heard, including the tones and expressions and the stops and the restarts, etc., and the explanations, to have that be your thinking so that eventually, when you don't hear it, you'll think about it. And then thinking about it, you'll move beyond memorizing, which is what the outline is for, to truly understanding, or at least you'll move to what Hegel is asking you to do, which is to be able to interpret what you hear, to interpret what you think, and to offer it as would a genius who is set over a certain group, as when Moses went to his stepfather, Jethro, sometimes called Shoaib. Shoaib told him, I see now that you have your community in order, but they always come to you for reference to each and every small thing and large thing that they need. And this is the aspect of genius. Why don't you appoint them as they are capable to 10 people, 50 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, thousands and tens of thousands, millions, and in the case of the Chinese civilization in India, billions? Why don't you appoint them to people? Point people to them so they will then answer their questions based on what you have taught them to think. And this he did, uh, appointing the sons of Aaron to the sacrifice. He, throughout the tribes of Jacob, and within them, appointed different people to certain numbers by which they would answer the questions and judge between the various peoples. And thus we have something called a representative democracy. Or democracy is misunderstood. Democracy, as a true word, comes from the god Democritus, or the great concept of Democritus. And within democracy is demerits. Democracy demerits. And you are demerited for not knowing what it is you're meant to think, oftentimes according to a schedule and according to something memorized. But as long as there is a grand authority and he may have a reference, or she may have a reference, it is okay to then divide up between the people judgments that should flow along the way that the initial person thinks. So if you're looking at a king, like the co-regent of the United Kingdom with his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles the Fourth, you should know generally what he stands for and be able to judge that out to people as you have, as you are capable, down to your family level or up to your family level, if you see it that way. And in doing so, if you do it well, you are judging fairly. But if you memorize a rule book or a group of logic or something else that is distinct from him, or another king that may be over you, then you are doing so unfairly. And during pharaonic times and even now, when the king changes, sometimes in the United States, when the president changes, we all shift to a new way of thinking, and those who haven't shifted are often left behind. So, all that is said to say, this is still leading to the concept of creating, in Latin, what we would call a daemon or a genius locorum, the egregore or the purpose, the oldest relative or the highest ranking member of a tribe, dead or alive, who we refer to, and we still have their ideas. In the case of the modern Western civilization, that genius locorum, the prima genus locus, is Hegel. And so hopefully this process of reading it, and if you heard the sing-song way I read the last, before this explanation, the 15 minutes before it, it is because I interpreted what he was saying as, if you are reading this out loud to people, you are it, as you would say in hide and go seek. So the symbols that Hegel has discussed, he has them throughout as apparently abbreviation. So IE may have a Latin root, I dot E dot, but I say in essence. And EG may have a Latin root, which is ergo, and I can translate that as therefore. But instead of writing etc dot, he writes ampersand c dot. And I interpret that as etc dot, which is et cetera, et space cetera. And then one of the reasons he may do that is et, like et is an entity, and set era is a false friend of Latin. It means set, S-E-T, the era, E-R-A. So et, entity, set the era, restart time. And when one restarts time, you're saying, as you would in Pharaonic Egypt, that a new pharaoh has risen and you begin time again, just as Gaius Julius Caesar reset time because his son with Cleopatra VII, by in vitro fertilization, uh, existed. And so he reset the calendar. And that's why we have before Christ and after Christ, or before the Common Era and after the Common Era. People will say for after the Common Era, since the era of Christ and his mission is still going on, even though maybe infra or extra or meta or quanta or mega sections around it, as in the Yuga system, it is still Anno Domini.